I know you mentioned you had all those smart people that tried to develop something but never launched a product. But what about when it was pulling something back from almost its death?
Oh, goodness. Yeah. So that first, truly agile team that I was on, where we were using extreme programming, one of the practices that we used was test automation and in particular, writing tests before we wrote, the code for whatever it was we were building. So basically, you're building a piece of software. It's going to have some behaviors, right? Like, oh, if I want to open a file, I click on the file menu and I click open and I should be able to see the files I have and then choose one and open it. So that's a behavior. And then underneath the hood, right, there's all this code that makes it happen. So one of our practices was before you add any new behavior, you write tests that will exercise that behavior and show that it works. And so that way, anything that our product did, there were tests that would validate that it's all working. And it was one of those things where in the moment, it always feels like, oh, it's making us go slower. But actually, then it enabled us to go faster. But where it really saved our bacon was I think it was the second big release of this product. So we had our first release that went well. People loved it. So then we started adding new stuff to it. We were and this is back in the day of like shrink wrap software, right? People would like, put a disk in their computer and install your program. And so we were in the beta test period, and every day the team would gather together and we'd look through any bugs that had come in. And one day this weird bug came in and we're like, oh, what's up with that? And we dug into it and we found, gosh, there really is this fundamental underlying issue. The problem was fixing it was going to require really, really, really low level changes in the code, like down in the deep, dark, scary parts, right? Where like, oh, if you change anything down there, everything above it might come crumbling down. And for any other product that I'd been involved with, this would have just stopped the release. It would have been like, we're not going to hit our date. We're not going to release when we thought we would. We're going to have to delay everything by, several months to implement this fix and then test everything and fix everything and whatever. Because we had been really disciplined about all the automated testing, we were able to attack that really scary change, come up with a fix, right? And it took a couple of days to like design and come up with this fix. And sure enough, it fixed the original problem, but it broke about 20% of the rest of the product. The good news was we knew what 20% was broken, right? Because all those tests were failing. And so for the rest of the week, every time we got together at our daily stand-up meeting, we were just like looking at like the things that were broken and we were just pairing up and like, hey, we'll take this one. All right, we'll take this one. Over the course of the week, it went from, 20% of the product is broken to 15 to 10 to 5. Eventually everything was working. And a week later, we all gathered in a conference room and looked at each other, right? And it was okay. Do we release the product? Is it going to make its original date? And we were all like, yeah, it's going to be okay. And we did it. And really that took something that would have been months of delay and turned it into, we had it completely working in a week. And then a week later, we were completely confident that if we released it, it was going to be safe. And yeah, that version of the product was much more widely adopted, got the company a whole bunch of new business, and actually had fewer field reported bugs than the original version.
I
So that
love that story.
discipline about, I liked what you said earlier about you gotta trust the process. You gotta love the process, right? We had come to have a lot of faith in this approach of write your tests first, write your tests first. And it really, really saved our bacon.
Okay. That's something I think anybody listening, especially actually doesn't, you don't necessarily need to be in R&D, having that rigor and sticking, like you said, and trusting that process. That's where it's going to save your bacon. So I'm going to use that phrase now. I've never used that in my life, but all right. People like me and a lot of the listeners to my podcast, they are not engineers. They're not in R&D. What I am personally, selfishly interested in is where do you see Agile showing up in places like HR, finance, education, just other places? Where do you see it showing up that can help?
Yeah. So where agile approaches at, Scrum in particular, but other related agile approaches are really appropriate is any area where you're doing complex work. And for the moment, I'll define complex work as work where when we go into it, we can't possibly know everything we're going to need to know. And so we can't just like make a step-by-step plan and then just follow that step-by-step plan and everything's going to be perfect. And it's particularly appropriate when we need people who have different skills, different backgrounds, different perspectives to work together effectively, right? To do all of that kind of inspecting and adapting and continuous improvement and learning. And so sure, software product development fits that description really well, but so do lots of other things, right? So I've ended up working with a number of biotech teams where they're not creating software, right? They're like, designing molecules and formulating experiments and analyzing data. But it's complex work and it takes different kinds of specialists to work together to do it. And Scrum is a great fit. I worked with a group in the Air Force, actually, that were using Scrum to do flight testing. So anytime, there's a change in the equipment on one of these military aircraft, before that new thing can be rolled out, there's a group that does really rigorous testing, including, taking it up in the air and making sure it does everything it needs to do. Again, right? Their team was very diverse. Pilots, various sorts of equipment specialists, analysts, etc., and very complex work. And agile approaches worked well. Works really well in marketing. It works really well in education. I have a very good friend, shout out to Paula Espinosa, who uses agile practices to help schools improve. And again, very complex systems, right? You got kids, you've got teachers, you've got administration, you've got parents, you've got policy changes. It's like everything's changing all the time. And to do it really well, agile approaches are a great fit because you need to constantly inspect and adapt, see what's working, see what's not working, make an adjustment. And then one of my favorite stories is I've had a few people who've gone through my classes and then gone back home and applied these practices at home at the family level.
Yeah.
The first one that I knew about was a product owner at Autodesk, actually, way back in the day. And, I'd done a workshop with their team and then came back, was doing some coaching. And, so I was talking to them. I'm like, oh, how's it going? And they're like, oh, yeah, the team totally gets it. It's really helping us do our work better. He said, but what I want to talk about with you is how we're using it at home. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, my wife, I work from home and my wife and I, operate this family farm and we homeschool our kids. And we are now kind of doing everything at home using Scrum. We have a board. The chores are up on the board. Every week we plan together as a team. What are the things we're going to do this week and who's going to do what chores and what other things are going on. The homework goes up on the board. At the end of every week, we do a family retrospective where we talk about what didn't go well, what we want to try differently next week. And he said, it's amazing. And I was like, oh, look at that. Right. So yeah, I think these concepts and practices broadly applicable.
Fascinated by that. I have 3 kids. There's work and then there's the side work. And then my wife has a dog boarding business. And I have a board on the refrigerator and I have Google Sheets. We have another calendar over there. And I'm wondering if I need to maybe try to organize that a little bit. I'm fascinated by that, by using it at home. That's interesting. I always thought it for the smart people that doing all the coding and stuff that I had no idea about. But if it can make me more organized and get things done, and I feel like I just have a jumble of mess in my head at all times because there's just 1,000 things